And our second question. Zelensky stated that Kiev reserves the right to determine who will represent European countries at potential negotiations with Russia. Lord of the European flies. At the June EU summit, it was not possible to approve a single candidate for the role of negotiator. Only 1 point out of 18 in the final statement is dedicated to diplomacy. How does Moscow view the very concept of a European negotiator appointed by Kiev's choice? I have already spoken about this briefly. Allow me to interrupt. I will allow myself to interrupt you because I have said it briefly. The President of Russia Federation, Vladimir Putin, spoke about this extensively and with all the justifications. He clearly outlined the Russian approach regarding the possible resumption of contacts with Europe. We are ready to talk with everyone who enjoys the trust of European countries, has not descended into openly Russophobic rhetoric, and is capable of making a constructive contribution to the dialogue. The article that the publication Politico refused to publish was also dedicated to this. They keep the citizens of the European Union in the dark, blinkered. I am referring to the article by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, which is precisely dedicated both to the etymology of the crisis in Ukraine and to the problems of European security. We have always preferred that all goals related to European security and to regional problems be settled through diplomatic means. But we have not seen any movement toward us, and we do not see it now. For now in the EU, everything is limited to speculations regarding the candidacy of a possible negotiator, wrestling a place for oneself at the negotiating table or under the table. I don't really know. For us, the very essence of the European position is more important, rather than specific personas and the procedures for their selection. What we are observing now are attempts by EU members to literally squeeze in, wedge themselves in, and some EU figures of the callous type are just trying to stick their faces into a crack. Even though the negotiating process has not yet taken any real shape, but they still want to insert themselves somewhere, where apparently they hope to qualitatively and quantitatively strengthen the positions, no, not their own, but those of the Kiev regime, and dictate peace terms to us, as they think, from a position of strength. So they must ask themselves a question: are they sovereign states, or have they surrendered their independence even to Zelensky? That is how the question must be posed now. One of the fresh examples is the joint statement of the Euro trio, consisting of Britain, France, and Germany on June 7, which contains a set of literally ultimatums to Russia. Perhaps this very document was developed by the Briton, the German, and the Frenchman, also laying out napkins and spoons for sugar in front of themselves, just as we saw this trio in a train car departing from Kiev. In the same state, perhaps, they developed this document too. Who knows? Judging by its content, they certainly were not sober. At the same time, Europe, generally speaking, does not even hide that it sees itself at the negotiating table not as a constructive intermediary, not as a mediator, not as a professional diplomat, but simply as a representative of the anti-Russian camp within some kind of unified delegation of Ukraine and Western Europe. Some kind of hybrid like that. Then they need to admit that they are a party to the conflict. The statement by Zelensky that you mentioned about the right of Bankova to select a negotiator from the European Union also fits into this pattern. One wants to ask a question. Is Zelensky going to look at everyone? It is rather strange that against the background of providing multifaceted military, financial, and other support to the neo-Nazi Kiev regime, and encouraging terrorist attacks on the civilian population of Russia, Europeans are speculating on the topic of some kind of role in the Ukrainian settlement. If you are completely bogged down in terrorist attacks carried out with your support, how can you pose as peace-loving negotiators? In the context of the negotiation process around Ukraine, a question arises. What can the Western Europeans offer us at all? Right now, they are acting on the principle. They pay for this war, therefore it supposedly cannot be ended without them. In essence, it turns out this is their only argument. But to this argument, there is also a corresponding answer. In other words, they are interested in how not to lose their investments in the Kiev regime and their own military-industrial complex. It turns out that they are not interested at all in bringing about a sustainable settlement. In any case, the prospects for dialogue, regardless of whom it is conducted with, will directly depend on the real readiness and ability of the Europeans to respect our legitimate interests. And this must be confirmed by concrete actions, first and foremost. If someone wants to help and does so, sincerely striving for peace, then, as Russian President Vladimir Putin said, we can only welcome this.